This is the E-commerce Edge podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the E-commerce Edge podcast with me, Jason Greenwood, your host. It is my pleasure to welcome our next amazing guest, Miss Dipti Desai from Crstl. Welcome, Dipti.
Hey, Jason. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure to have you along for the ride with me today. And, you are Crstl. We'll get into the depths of Crstl and what it is, how it came into being, all that sort of stuff. CEO, co-founder, been doing that for 4.5 years. But before we get into that, please help me understand better how you even got into this industry. You have had an extensive product management, product development, product strategy background prior to becoming a co-founder of Crstl. But why don't you tell me what sucked you into this wonderful world of tech, ops, product, marketing, all that stuff?
Yeah, for sure. I'll give you the quick version. The quick version is that in terms of how I got into technology, I originally trained as a hardware engineer, and my first job out of college was in Silicon Valley. So that was the most obvious way to getting sucked into the world of tech. I chose to study electrical engineering because I was in a special program in high school in electronics. And so I always loved physics. And so that's how it all started. And then fast forward to more of the software and the data and the side of things. I spent a good chunk of my career in the 2010s working on a variety of different data products. And that was a golden period after the iPhone had launched. It had only been a couple years at this point. And similar to some of the AI revolution happening at the moment, big data, nobody talks about it today, but the 2010s big data was a big theme and a big deal. So I really got to cut my teeth working on a variety of different products during that period, and which is how it really all started.
And look, you've got a pretty serious and hardcore engineering pedigree. You're clearly very smart, and you've turned your sights on this product that you are building internally. If we look back across your pedigree, and when we think of product manager, Meta Markets acquired by Snap, you also did a 3-year stint at Uber. When we think of, I guess, certainly one of the greatest product companies ever created. I think digital product companies, I think Uber would rank right up there along with Airbnb and a few others, and bringing new business models to market. When all of a sudden your brand enters the lexicon, the Uberization of X, then okay, cool. It's like people don't call Kleenexes tissue, they call them Kleenex, right? So you know that you've entered the mainstream lexicon when you start being used to describe other things. And it feels like that would be an excellent place to cut your teeth in terms of digital product.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Uber was definitely a transformative experience in my career. And I think a lot of my colleagues from that time in particular would share that sentiment. It's also the case that when I got to Uber, I had a bit more industry experience than perhaps the average person at the company. And that was actually a very interesting exercise too, to unlearn certain things when you're operating at that scale and at that speed. But at the same time, develop a lot of new skill sets. And really, I think it was a real playground for us because Uber had to solve so many problems all at once, right? Whether it around data, obviously, which is the part that I was closest to, but just in terms of the consumer experience, safety, payments, sort of new pricing model.
Security, DevSecOps, all that stuff, right?
Right, that stuff, right? So there's no shortage of really interesting and also really important problems to be working on. And yeah, so definitely a very transformative experience in my life.
Yeah, and it's interesting when we fast forward to Crstl and co-founding Crstl over 4.5 years ago now. You're an EDI platform for Shopify, and I work heavily in the B2B space. So, of course, I know what EDI is. A lot of people won't necessarily know how important EDI is to B2B commerce, full stop, as an enabler and as a middleware technology that really makes a lot of orders and transactions and documents flow between businesses. There's nothing in your background that I would look back across your background and go, oh, she's going to start a company that works with EDI in the B2B e-commerce space. Like that, there's nothing in there that would lead me to believe to naturally connect those dots. So how the heck did you decide, okay, cool, I want to start an EDI company?
Yeah, so a couple of things. The patterns that I saw were maybe a little bit different, right? The overlaps that I saw in terms of the problem space and my background was one is that at the end of the day, this is really a massive data platform that we're building at Crstl, right? And that perfectly fits with everything that I had known and done until that time. So it definitely pulls a lot of that experience out of me and then learning new things. It's also the case that in commerce, Uber was the most classic product and platform bridging the online and the offline, right? Bits and atoms. And that's what a lot of commerce, and particularly in the way we enable offline and online commerce. So that sort of really brought a lot of empathy to the complexity of what it means to be running a business in the real world, right? Versus if we were building data products for developers, for example, right? Like those consideration sets are very different. Their customer base is very different. Their level of comfort with certain things is higher than others, et cetera, et cetera. So I saw those two things as a very strong continuation of the themes that I had experienced. And also, there were some new things that I ran into during COVID when I helped set up a nonprofit alongside a few different folks and helping stand up their digital storefront to alleviate the shortage for PPEs in the US. And with that, obviously, there were new things that I learned. But I would say that experience in building data platforms, data products, and having deep empathy for operators who bridge the online and offline worlds were very strong themes and patterns that I saw that I felt like I could add to that experience.
Yeah, it's so interesting because EDI is such an antiquated technology. Let's maybe first, for those that don't know, I know what it is because I work with it every day, but there's potentially some people in our audience who don't know exactly what EDI, electronic data interchange, is, what role it plays in the commerce stack, why it is still so mission critical for many businesses to be enabled for EDI. And then secondarily, you originally started out, platform was only available as pre-integrated with Shopify. You've since expanded it to where you can work with Magento and Woo and a couple of others, but you were trying to tap into clearly the Shopify ecosystem to begin with, which isn't necessarily known for B2B. It is more now. There's B2B on Shopify Plus, but for many years, if you wanted to do B2B on Shopify, you needed a Spark layer, you needed a wholesale Gorilla, you needed plugins, apps, customizations to do anything serious B2B on Shopify. And again, that's changed more laterally, but when you started up Crstl, there was no B2B on Shopify Plus. The core data primitives for B2B did not exist in the platform. And price lists didn't matter to the platform. There was no such thing as orgs and customer account hierarchies and any of that stuff. And so you were very early to the game, I would say, of even thinking about how we could enable serious B2B to happen on Shopify. So first of all, what was your decision-making process like there? Because considering there's 30, 40 B2B dedicated or B2B focused platforms out there that are not called Shopify, but you didn't start there. You started with Shopify. So walk me through that decision.
Yeah, great question. So I'll address that one and then I'll go back to your first question around what is EDI and so on. So this is the classic case of you can connect the dots looking back, right? And in the moment, you're asking a lot of questions. The answers aren't very clear. So let me break that down a little bit. So what happened is, as I mentioned earlier, right, during the thick of COVID, I had already left Uber at this point. The company had gone public. I was looking for my next real challenge in my career. I was really ready for it. And I had this very strong intuition that maybe that next big challenge in my career was going to be something I created for myself, right? But at the same time, I was very open to options. I had no ego around wanting to start a company or anything like that, unless I found a problem that was going to keep me up at night. And I felt like I had really come across a wrong that I felt like I was uniquely suited to help, as they say. So those were some clear criteria. Now, what happened is when I was helping with this nonprofit and COVID was very much here, around that time, this was fall of 2020 or so, is I started to have brands, which happened to be in the Shopify ecosystem. And we had set up our digital storefronts for the nonprofit and Shopify as well. So I had reconnected with that ecosystem. And these brands were coming to me because they knew I had a background in data, et cetera. And they were just sharing the data fragmentation problem and so on and so forth. What started to happen is, this was before there was any company or anything like that, is I just started to tinker and started hypothesizing around. In the 2010s, Datadog was one of the breakout successes in the data space, right? And so as I was looking, I thought, hey, why isn't there a Datadog for commerce? What might that look like if there were a Datadog for commerce? And that was just the initial sort of hypothesis, right? Because at this point, it is bringing that data background, but it is also applying to the world of offline and online that I really wanted to help serve in some way. And so as I was helping these brands, started working with their retail, wholesale data and things like that, and really started to peel the layers of the onion, realizing that a lot of the realizing or just a point of view became over the next 6 months, now we're in 2021, that, hey, maybe these platforms that exist as of now are incompatible with where the world is going. And we were already in 2021 by this point. What does that mean? 2020 felt like a big deal, right? Like we've entered this decade and this year that we'd all heard so much about, and there was so much leading up to it. And of course, COVID happens. But also there was in the zeitgeist, a whole generational shift that had occurred, right? Millennials were entering decision-making positions. Gen Z had certainly entered the workforce. And this is a generation or two that looks at the data and the tools around them and their experiences on the consumer side. And the disconnect couldn't be wider, right? And just growing. There were other things that had happened, right? The API economy was very much here. ChatGPT, et cetera, was still about 12, 18 months out. But even with just the API economy, the low code, no code, the millennials and Gen Z in the workforce, the other interesting, and perhaps this was the most contrarian thing, is that because I was in the trenches with these brands, looking at their business with them, just at their business setup, the vision that they had for their business, they kept telling me that when the world reopens, we don't think that it's all going to be all e-commerce all the time. We think that the world is going to go omni-channel. And maybe the only thing that we really did there is we really listened to the people who were even more in the trenches than I. Because ultimately something like this is in the service of others, right? We're building the platform for them and it's in their service. And you have to be able to gauge their intuition and their judgment as well. And so now separately, what was happening is the Shopify ecosystem was booming. They had built, among other things, this brilliant developer app ecosystem, which had, right, enabled so much of its success and the success of merchants and other partners around it. And so I started, and there were a ton of investor articles on this is the next cool product you could be building on the Shopify ecosystem. And here's this. And I would just simply go to the Shopify app store and I would search for EDI. And because I was working with EDI data by this point, right? And by virtue of helping these brands, and nothing would come up. And then I would look at the data, which would say, hey, this is how the market is expected to grow. This is whatever, 70, 80% of trade, multi-trillion-dollar trade goes via EDI. And I was just sitting there by myself being like, this is not checking out. I'm not sure why, because I didn't know anybody at Shopify or really corporate or anything of that sort at the time. But I just started to feel like there's something amiss here. But at the same time, I also felt like I couldn't be the first person possibly to be noticing this, right? And so I kept telling myself, you were missing something. And so I just went down this rabbit hole for almost a year. Honestly, pretty much 2021 had come and gone by this point when I was still helping out the brands. We were still testing out the Datadog for commerce hypothesis. I was still looking at, so why isn't there EDI for Shopify? It didn't even occur to me to chase down anybody there to learn more. And I was just trying to go by whatever material was available on the internet. And at some point, it was very much just trusting the work I had done, the intuition and what the customers were telling me. And maybe this is where some of my product background gave me that gumption to say that maybe you need to go create the gap that you're seeing. And of course, then we ended up making the decision. We had actually already raised our seed round by this point, and credit to our lead investors, Mosaic General Partnership, when I told them that, hey, I don't think the Datadog for commerce has legs from a commercial perspective. I think we would be solving a real problem, but I don't think the commercial opportunity is there. But I do think that if we built a new type of B2B commerce platform, that there might be something here. And then it was more a matter of, so then what are you waiting for if you're so sure? Go do it. And so then started running with that. Yeah, and then we were in stealth for another year. So then we finally came out of stealth just over 2 years ago. And then since then have been scaling the product and the team and the business.
Wow. Super exciting story, and eating your own dog food that you've produced, and you see how the sausage is made, and therefore you can make it at scale. Certainly a story I hear over and over again from the tech world, and particularly from the commerce world, and especially from the app space and the commerce enablement space is a pretty common refrain. And it mirrors a little bit my journey as a consultant in B2B and specializing in doubling and tripling down on B2B. You were skating where you felt the puck was going, or already was. I did the same thing when I started my own independent consultancy. I'd already been in the industry for over 20 years and was like, okay, I'm going to, after working inside brands and working inside agencies and building agencies for years, it was like, okay, what do I want to do next? And it was like, yeah, I want to go independent, but I don't want to just be a generic e-commerce consultant because it's so red ocean. Everybody and their dog is a B2C and D2C consultant. Every SI and their dog is a B2C and D2C consultant. The last thing I want to do is just be awash in a sea of sameness and trying to differentiate myself in that sea of sameness, which is really hard to do. And I was like, I've got this deep and broad experience in B2B. Why don't I just absolutely hardcore niche down on that, go hard at that, evangelize that, make a market if there isn't one, because B2B has historically lagged B2C and D2C from a technology perspective. It's lagged by about 5 to 10 years since there was commerce, right? That's the reality. From a business model and go-to-market perspective, it's lagged B2C and D2C, and especially from a digital transformation perspective, it's lagged B2C and D2C just massively. And it was like, okay, this is probably going to be hard at first because I don't think we've reached the full tipping point yet of B2B getting digital religion yet. And there was still a lot of older legacy individuals running all these very large manufacturers and distributors. It was like, there's going to have to be some attrition in this industry before we get some true digital natives entering the industry that are ready to make a change in this industry. But I think I saw the writing on the wall. I started to see some green shoots in the space, much like you did. And it was like, I feel like this industry has legs, and if I have to be the one to help make it happen, then I'm just going to be that guy. And it felt very blue ocean. First 2 years, really tough. Felt like I was more of an evangelist than I was a consultant. And then I felt the tide turning really in a very serious way last year. The B2B market started to turn. And then this year is going to be by far our biggest year. We'll probably end up doing close to double the revenue we did in 2024 and 2025 because of that tipping point being reached. And I feel like it came into this industry at just the right time where that tipping point is really starting to happen. B2Bs are really starting to get digital religion. They are, in order to win, typically in the B2B world, if you're a supplier, it is your whale customers that want to do EDI. It is your biggest potential customers that don't want to manually log into your portal and place an order. They want to create the order in their e-procurement system or in their ERP, and then they want to send that across down the digital wire to you without it ever having to touch human hands. And that's something that I think is an unlock in terms of a channel perspective. It now unlocks an entirely new sales channel for some of these B2B businesses that maybe they never touched before, that they never thought that they could go after before. And they always thought, oh, well, that's for the big boys and girls of town. I can't sell to those big boys and girls because I don't have a way to communicate with them and share data with them. And with Crstl, they do. Now, what's super interesting about this for me is that despite all the talk in the industry about agentic, despite all the talk in the industry about punch out and more modern technologies than EDI is still just massive. I was doing some research for a client recently, and I was just staggered by the sheer volume of EDI, like the multiple trillions of dollars worth of B2B business that is done every year exclusively through EDI channels. And I'm like, wow, okay, this is mind blowing. And you would automatically assume that EDI would have died out long, because it's like a 50-year-old technology, that you would have thought it would have died out by now. But if anything, it's become more entrenched as people want to automate their business.
Yeah, exactly. And so here's a kind of a few things that, sort of to your point, I had to get conviction on and really wrap my head around how I saw the future of EDI. So EDI, for those of you who haven't heard of it before, stands for Electronic Data Interchange. And it is, so there's a few things actually I would love to take this opportunity to myth bust, if you will. Mythbuster 1 is that actually EDI is not a technology, and maybe that is the only one myth that probably ought to be busted today if there is one. EDI is not a technology at all, is what I came to the realization. And then I started to think about what does that mean and how do I explain that to other people? And there's two analogies that, depending on the audience, that I've used that people tend to like and relate with. So I'll use the first one, which is that actually EDI is like English. What does that mean? It's actually a language, right? And what has the English language done is today it's been widely adopted. It's had network effects because of its historical origins and so on. It standardizes business communication. So even if you get together 5 people from, I don't know, Australia, Canada, Texas, Boston, South Africa, whatever it might be, and put them all in a room, and they might use different exact words to say the same thing, but at the same time, everybody understands each other. Because there is this implicit filter in each of our minds, which is, hey, if this person we know is from this country or this state, they tend to use this word, right? Which means X. What are we doing really at that point is we're running a normalization filter through our minds on the English language itself, right? Which helps us communicate with each other. Contrast that with if you had 5 people in a room without any real technology and they're all speaking their own language, chaos would ensue, nothing would get done, right? There would just be no way to move things forward. And so that actually is what the function of EDI is, that it is really language. The other analogy that some people can gravitate towards is that EDI is a little bit to us like SMTP and POP3 in the world of email, right? Now, it's a protocol, and those protocols have existed for very long, for multiple decades at this point. But when you look at personal email application, for example, Yahoo Mail, and contrast that with Gmail, what a night and day difference, right? Yahoo Mail, I remember, spam used to take over the inbox. There wasn't enough storage space, so you would have to delete 5 emails if you wanted the next batch of emails to come through, right? And you didn't know what was waiting for you, so you didn't know how many emails to delete or whatever it is. Gmail comes along and immediately solves for all those problems, right? So what did they do? It's still the same protocols that they're leveraging, but they really built a very strong application layer on top, right? So presumably they just had better algorithms to detect spam. They opened up space, and so they presumably were creative and smart about how to make space, if you will, for all of this content and pictures and files and so on and so forth. But what they also then went on to do is build an ecosystem and a platform around Gmail, right? So for example, if we're using G Suite at work, we can connect it to our HubSpot, right? And do work that way, to connect it to our CRM as an example. So that opens up interoperability. It opens up automation. You can do the work in your primary place. Those are the things they enable, which is completely removed really from the protocol underneath it, or for that matter, what Superhuman is doing, right? Which is, right, like at the same time. So
giving email superpowers.
yeah, and so that's a lot of like how we looked at Crstl. Is the EDI is really a means to an end. It helps you understand, right? Otherwise, what are the alternatives? And people, by the way, often confuse that API is replacing EDI. And again, it is very complementary, right? Like today at Crstl, EDI, API, and AI coexist, harmony, for the simple reason that each has its own place, and one doesn't necessarily replace the other. One supercharges the other. And so then our job as builders, creators, taking this product to market, scaling this in market, is to understand when to use what, in what order, and how much, and how little, and all of those things, right? That's the art and science of it all for us. So that's really why EDI continues to have these stronghold, to your point, is because it is like the English language, where it just has, because it serves to standardize things, it really helps in the adoption and therefore in the network effects, right? And very complementary to API and so on.
And I like your analogy of comparing it to languages that we can all understand, even if there's subtle differences and nuances between them. And I lived in New Zealand for almost 30 years, and certainly you would get wrapped across the wrists if you confused an Aussie with a Kiwi and vice versa. When an American or a Canadian hears the Kiwi or the Aussie accent, they most of the time think of them as being very similar, even though the locals would say they're nothing alike, right? They'd say the Kiwi and the Aussie accent are as different as the Aussie and the American accent, or the Kiwi and the American accent. Whereas me, growing up in America, spending almost 30 years in New Zealand and traveling heavily between New Zealand and Australia and having family in Australia, I would say as an outsider looking in, they're more similar than they are different, right? But that's not how they see it. And so it's quite interesting. And I think the other takeaway from this is the fact that also EDI isn't just one language. It isn't just like the language of English. There is 20 different major EDI languages around the world, and being able to have a translator between those languages is also important. Not just being able to pick up the subtle nuances between a language that's largely similar, but some of those languages are as different as, they still call it EDI, but it could be as different as Mandarin to English, and they still have to connect to and speak to each other. So you still have to have a translation layer in between, a digital translation layer between those two, to make them speak the same language ultimately at either end. And I think that's really important too. And then the final thing that I'd love to understand is, you are far from the first major EDI platform to go to market for commerce with a commerce bent or a commerce focus. There's probably 50 major EDI platforms, from SPS to True to, there's a ton of them. And whilst you maybe couldn't find in the App Store of Shopify an EDI plugin or an app for that ecosystem, there certainly were already technologies out there that either had private apps for Shopify or had some form of API connector for Shopify or something like that in their platforms. So what was it about this space uniquely that you said, this needs a shakeup badly? And I think I'm the person to do it because there's other technology out there that facilitates these EDI transactions, but there's a gap here that I uniquely recognize that I think this has got legs.
Yeah, great question. Going back to, it was the moment in time we found ourselves, right? Which was, again, early days of COVID. But I had also had almost a decade's worth of experience by that point, building a lot of data platforms and had seen the shift there, right? I think most of us remember, or many of us have the benefit of remembering when the first iPhone came out. And then
Oh, yes.
seeing in front of my eyes and playing a small role in some of these products that went on to that came to exist directly as a result or second order effects of the smartphones, right? Because what started to happen then is suddenly you had all this data volume that the world had never seen before, right? So what did that mean? All of the databases had to be reimagined. So a lot of new ones came to be, commercial, open source, application.
No SQL databases and everything else came to be.
Exactly, right? And the application layers had to be reimagined. And in many ways, many of us had to reskill, upskill ourselves when there's data revolution around us, much in the same way that we're probably all reskilling, upskilling now in the age of AI. So seeing some of those patterns and also seeing this API economy where you couldn't assume not that long ago that every company that could or should have an API did have one, right? To go from that over less than 10-year time span where it used to be that there's an app for that. It soon became there's an API for that.
Yes, and soon there's going to be AI for that.
Exactly. And so seeing a lot of that sort of shift. But again, just layering it on, particularly with the demographic shift, I think that was super compelling because it was so obvious that this generation was impatient, right? They were raised on instant gratification and want everything now. And when these same people show up in the workforce, they're not going to be okay with months-long, years-long implementations and the costs. And guess what? Because of the shift in technology, there was a whole new way to deliver on those experiences without subjecting them to those long timelines or costly sort of experiences. So it was just being a bit of a, I guess, observer and seeing these things starting to intersect and then thinking, maybe the timing is just right now, because you could have a generational shift, but maybe the technology shift doesn't support it, or vice versa, right? But it felt like at this moment in time, both of those things were shifting. And then ultimately, there is a bit of a, you don't really know, right? You have to go, that is foundational to being an entrepreneur, is there really isn't certainty and there really isn't a guarantee, but all you can try and do is have a sound hypothesis, which is informed by research and other signal and ultimately a little bit of intuition, and then be willing to take on that difficult journey to see if the hypothesis has merit, right? And that's really how it all started.
And I sense, and you didn't say this exactly, but I'm reading between the lines here, that in the same way that Shopify completely ended the retail e-commerce industry from a platform perspective, largely because of ease of use. Almost anyone, you do not have to be a technical genius to stand up a Shopify website. There's tutorials online. Within literally probably 3 hours, almost anybody can get a Shopify store up and running, load a few products, get payments up and running, and be able to start distributing that link across their socials and start selling stuff. It was that level of ease of use for non-technical founders of businesses that made them massively popular. It was just the sheer accessibility of the platform and the hyper low cost of the platform. When you combine those two things together, and when they took the pain away of payments, I think people don't necessarily give Shopify enough credit for taking away, because I remember 25 years ago when I entered e-commerce, you got your merchant account through your bloody business bank. That's where you got your merchant account. Then you had to figure out how to get that integrated into your e-commerce website, and it was almost always a custom integration of some. There was no Stripe, there was no Braintree, there was no, okay, sure, pretty early on there was PayPal, but if you wanted anything more sophisticated than that, it was a heavy lift.
Really?
So I think people discount in many respects just how accessible Shopify has made commerce to everyone. Now, it doesn't mean everybody will be successful at it,
Yeah.
but it just means the mechanics and the operations of getting a site up and running and transactional, they have lowered that barrier to entry massively. And it seems like you identified, okay, cool. There might be 50 other EDI platforms out there, but they are for technical people. They are for system integrators. They are for SIs. They are for specialists in the space. These are not platforms that your average merchant is going to go and implement, even if they're a B2B business that is a pure play B2B business that has a significant technical team that, for example, manages their internal IT and their ERP. Very rarely is that team going to also be a specialist in EDI. Very rarely. And so I'm assuming that you identified, hey, look, if we make our platform nearly of kind of our North Star is trying to make it as easy to use as Shopify is to use, then that's probably going to give us a pretty damn good opportunity to grab some significant market share quickly and open up these new channels to these B2B businesses.
Yeah. So some of this is also being able, like for me personally, being able to connect some of those dots looking back, because there's perhaps a little bit of the in me that doubts me, which is, hey, why do you think you're the one to go make it that easy? But
Yes.
it is actually exactly that, because we did start with something very hard. We did start by serving, and we still do, the little guy. And obviously now we have gone up market, and so we could serve customers pretty much of any size. But we really, without over worrying about too many factors, we felt like, hey, this type of platform needs to work for the little guy as much as it needs to work for the bigger companies. Because it was also the case, and it still is very much the case, that the bigger companies too now want to refresh their stack, want to go beyond digital transformation to business process transformation. And so we're seeing the appetite and the mindset shift across the board. But there was, in some ways, this is also where it perhaps a non-obvious parallel from the Uber experience, which is Uber made it possible to earn a living on the platform. And so brought a lot of that sentiment and ethos to making this work, because if the drivers are suppliers on the Uber platform, then these brands are suppliers for large retailers, mid-sized retailers. And how do you empower them and give tools to them was very much, I think, an inspiration from the impact Uber can make on the livelihoods of millions of people around the world.
Yeah, and I think EDI is uniquely placed to be able to do that, in the sense that even some pretty large manufacturers and distributors that I have worked with in the past don't do EDI yet. And so they don't necessarily know that there's an entire segment of the market that they can't, if they've relied on field sales, or let's say I'm dealing oftentimes with second and third generation family owned manufacturers and distributors. The child or the grandchild of the founder has now taken over the business. They historically have built their business on the back of field sales, SDRs, BDRs, BDMAEs, that kind of model, knocking on more doors, going to more trade shows, trying to land more customers, and then having a very much a human mediated experience, right? Where the customer sends an email to their account manager, the account manager keys an order into an ERP or an OMS, the customer sends a WhatsApp message to their account manager, they send a Slack message, they send a Teams message to their account manager. Oh, I need information about this product or whatever it is. Can you give me the price? Can you send me this information? The account manager then they go to their network drive, they go to their desktop, they zip up a whole bunch of collateral and information and spreadsheets, and then they send it off to the buyer. The buyer generates a PO, sends it back again, and then the account manager does the rest. And in that world, even a self-service e-commerce portal isn't going to solve for all customer challenges, because there are still customers that want a more automated experience than a self-service commerce portal. Now, a self-service commerce portal is fantastic for that fat middle that loves self-service. And even some of the customers that will continue to transact via EDI and punch out, there is still a whole raft of digital services they want to grab through a portal other than the transaction, right? Other than the actual purchase. But so often I will ask a manufacturer or distributor, have you thought about tendering for these government contracts? Or have you thought about tendering for these RFPs? Or have you thought about, and they almost without exception, they'll say, yeah, we have, but usually with these RFPs or these tenders, they have a very explicit requirement in there that we're able to transact with them via these automated digital channels called EDI or punch out or e-procurement. And we don't have that capability as a business. So we just don't go after that business. We go after all the other business, but we don't go after that business. And when you tell them and you explain to them how relatively easy it is to implement those channels or service those channels as part of the digital transformation journey, especially if you're going to be putting in a new digital catalog, digital commerce system. Geez, it's a no-brainer to start thinking about EDI and punch out at the same time, because now you've got a digital catalog that you can surface, right?
Mhm.
But I think that a lot of these businesses, they've never thought, because they see themselves as small, they think, oh, I'm too small to go after this type of business because we don't have the technical nous to be able to even go and try to win that business. And I think what you're trying to do and what I try to do is to say, it almost doesn't matter what size you are. If you want to get to be an enterprise class supplier, you have to be able to service customers this way. Otherwise, you'll stay the same size that you are. You
Well,
have to be able to go after bigger opportunities, and that's what you enable.
well said. That's exactly. We still have some prospects that will get on a call or email us and say, hey, we're very small, so we don't know if you would work with us. And we say, of course we do, because we don't want you to stay small forever unless you want to, which is totally okay. But exactly, very well said.
It is exciting to feel like you're an enabler of completely brand new channels and brand new routes to market for businesses. Because in the B2C and D2C world, we don't have that. Yes, there's omni-channel in B2C and D2C, and that usually takes the form of physical stores, social shopping, TikTok shops, obviously online e-commerce stores, Amazon, eBay, marketplaces, etc. But we have a unique opportunity in the B2B world to have all those same channels, but also have EDI and punch out and e-procurement channel. And that is a very exciting thing when these B2B businesses go, what are some levers that I can actually pull tomorrow from a growth perspective? Because
Mhm.
they're all trying out, they're all trying to expand the channels. They're all trying to expand the market and it's interesting because Amazon just recently, I'm sure you've dealt with this. Amazon just a couple of months ago had the great 1P purge. Okay. And I had a number of clients that were caught in the 1P purge, right? And some of those lost 25% of their business overnight. Now, some of them were already selling 3P as well, so it wasn't as bad for them. Some of them immediately added the 3P channel through Amazon, so that mitigated some of their challenges. But some of them were injured so badly by that purge that they were instantly rushing out trying to find these new channels to sell through.
Mhm.
And in cases, those channels were significant opportunities, but they had never even considered them. They knew that they were there, but they had never seriously considered selling through those channels because of the EDI requirement,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I've used this example on the podcast before. One of these clients, they wanted to sell through Zorro, and Zorro sent them a massive PDF document, 20 plus page PDF document that said, great, we'll let you sell through us, but here's how you will integrate with us. And if you can't integrate with us this way, you can't sell through us.
Yeah.
So get your digital ducks in a row and come back and see us when you're ready to be able to meet this specification of selling through our channels.
Yeah.
And this conversation these businesses are having every single day, and they feel demoralized when they receive a spec document like that they can't even understand. They can't. It's like a foreign language to them. And I'm guessing that that prompts a lot of those initial discussions between your clients and you.
That's correct. Yeah. And that's what we are here to share with them and support them, right? Is we study this language and we go do all of this heavy lifting for you precisely so you don't have to do it and so that you can focus instead on bringing the best products to market that excites you and that's your purpose. So leave a lot of kind of this heavy lifting to us and that then becomes our specialty, then that becomes our purpose and mission, right? To enable them.
And what is your primary go-to-market strategy? Is it you will do all the implementations of your own software, so your product and a managed and professional services business, or it's you would really ideally focus 100% on product and then have SIs and partners and system integrators working with you to actually implement your software on behalf of the merchant? What does your implementation model typically look like with these merchants?
Yeah. Our implementation model today, so particularly when we look at any supplier really of any size, and at the very core, really what they're looking for is connectivity with retailers. Right now, they could be wholesale, they could be dropship, et cetera. And then typically also connectivity or integrations to scale their operations and finance, right? So ERPs, WMSs, and things like that. So at Crstl, we have innovated on both fronts, meaning we've almost built out like a two-part digital network, right? On the one hand, it is the retailers that we integrate the suppliers with. On the other hand, we help scale their business by connectivity with
Their operational systems.
yeah. And in the middle is also like our proprietary unified schema, right? Because along the lines of normalizing the English language because all these retailers are speaking similar but different languages or dialects, depending on how you look at it. We built this which is also a core part of our IP. And so that helps us connect kind of Crstl to the external world, if you will, of these other systems. And across both parts of the digital network today, we do the implementation ourselves. That said, we are also believers in the right tool for the right job, the right models for the right customer, right? And so we definitely are believers in that. And so we're eager to see how some of these models play out, and particularly with AI, as some of these firms are getting disrupted themselves potentially or are reimagining their own delivery model, their own business model, et cetera. I think it will definitely be interesting to see how our delivery model evolves as this part of the world is changing very quickly in front of our eyes.
Yeah, no question about it. And what is your typical, because I think of EDI and specifically middleware platforms like yours, I think of you as an EDI specific iPaaS platform. That's what I think of you. That's what I think of you as. And it may be slightly wrong, but I think it's more right than wrong to think of you like that, because you are an integration platform as a service, but you specialize in the EDI language. And so instead of being able to connect your CRM to your e-commerce platform or your ERP to your e-commerce platform, it's no, we're connecting buyers and sellers via this middleware, right? And you can almost think of you like an EDI version of Rhythm or some of the other channel management software that's out there, but it's so specialized and it's so unique that it requires a level of specialization that a lot of iPaaS platforms say they do EDI, but when you get under the bonnet, they really don't do EDI. They're really just a digital document interchange system that doesn't really, it's really just plumbing. It doesn't have any business logic in the middleware around EDI, whereas you have that business logic. You have to have that business logic in your system to be able to facilitate that data interchange across disparate dialects, as you put. I love that. I guess I love that analogy. That dialect analogy is really appropriate, I think, for EDI. But when you guys go in and you do the integration with these systems, do you, especially if you don't already have an out-of-the-box API level connector, would you typically then say, look, let's use an SFTP server or let's use some sort of intermediary technology where we can get the documents out, store them in a central location, maybe it's an S3 bucket or something like that. We'll pick the document up, we'll translate it, we'll do whatever we need to do, and then we'll dump it wherever the buyer or the seller wants us to dump it, and we wash our hands of it. Or do you consider yourselves such a critical part of the ecosystem that no, we want to be directly connected with, say, the ERP on the seller side, and we want to be directly connected with either the ERP or the procurement system, whatever it is, on the buy side?
Yeah, great question. We're actually closer to the second,
Okay.
which is very deeply integrated, embedded with the ERP or the correct system on the retailer side or the left-hand side, in this example on the buyer side, but then also with the ERP, et cetera, on the seller side. And we actually, we view ourselves, and I think we're really modeled to be a platform, right? So we actually, completely understandable how we could be seen as middleware, but really we're a platform. And today, it is exciting to see that other companies, ERPs, WMSs, and other analytics companies, et cetera, are building on top of Crstl, right? Which is in part possible because we don't talk too much about this one just yet, but we also have an API a la Shopify that other developers can build on top of and either be able to offer a new business line to their customers or be able to actually sunset some tooling that they have bolted on to their previous EDI provider because XML data, batch, whatever, any number of reasons that they can just sunset and use our APIs to now power these workflows that they ought to be in 2025. So we're very much rapidly have evolved to become a platform of sorts. And we are finding ourselves to be a mission critical layer, therefore, right? Because much like with Shopify is the hidden infrastructure between the consumer and the merchant, we are similarly the hidden infrastructure between the B2B customer and the seller, right? And with the ability for other players to now build on top of us and extend their business capabilities and our network. Yeah, it's a pretty exciting kind of extension and expansion of that platform play for us.
And what commerce systems do you connect to today out of the box? I checked your website. Maybe I'm just an idiot. I couldn't find a searchable list of out-of-the-box integrations. I'm not quite sure why. I would think that would be a major thing. I can see a list of logos scrolling across the screen, and I can work out what most of those logos are. But is that something you're working on? Is a really clear, just delineated list that's searchable of the out-of-the-box integrations you have?
Yeah, yeah. It definitely is a request that comes up very often. I think we have a couple kind of perspectives on it, right? Which is it is very tempting for companies or for when looking for a solution to look at a logo or a name on a list and assume that it works. But what we found in our experience, particularly when it comes to integrations with WMSs and ERPs, what we found was there was a lot of marketing, but not a lot of substance. And I'll clarify what I mean or elaborate on what I mean by that. And we were, and as a result of that, when customers would go sign up with that other company and so on, they would be left disappointed. And we were very intentional on under promise and over deliver. So what we really look at, particularly from the systems integrations perspective, is there's the integration breadth, right? Here's all the N number of ERPs we integrate with. And then there's the integration depth. What we really care about is prioritizing the ERPs that our customer set is heavily leveraging, and then making sure that we have the best-in-class integration, which means the workflows get very deep. Every company, 100 companies could be using the same ERP, but they all set it up differently, which means their business logic is pretty different. And so we would much rather have that one we support multiple ERPs, for example, at this point, but we'd much rather support just one ERP, but go really deep and make it actually work for these customers versus be tempted to have the longer list, but when they actually start using it, it just doesn't have the depth that may have market parity because maybe the other providers who have the list that they publish also they may not have the depth, but we were very intentional about wanting to have that depth as much as the breadth. And so in that sense, we took like a depth first approach versus a breadth first approach. And also we are, for better or worse, we market ourselves somewhat lightly compared to our product capabilities and things like that. But maybe that's also the reason we see such strong customer adoption and retention and word of mouth and things like that. But maybe that ought to change, and a good reminder. So, because we
No worries.
definitely under market for sure.
I think being honest and transparent about the level of depth that you expect to be able to go to with these integrations, but here's our current list, but we're adding to this every month. I think just as long as you're honest and as long as you're not saying you have an integration that you don't have, I think that's a fair way to go. And I think that's fair for the market to expect an honest level of transparency around the level of integration that you do. But what is your biggest target market today in terms of merchants? Do you target the US, North America, Europe, UK, whole of English-speaking Western world? Where do you plant your flag today that you say, if we can really nail this market, then it will allow us to just go ballistic?
Yeah. The English-speaking Western market is really a good chunk of our customer base today. And that's really our focus. And again, that's because we want to go really deep, right? And so that already allows us a lot of diversity in the customer base because we have customers whose businesses were doing $500,000 when they came to us, and all the way to customers who have $1 billion in sales, right? And everyone in between is our customer set today. And then across that demographic, we also see good overlap in the systems that are leveraged and things like that. Now, to be clear, there is still a lot of diversity in the systems on the ERP and WMS side, for sure. Even still, it allows us to constrain the problem a bit more,
Yes.
than do our part to be best of class for that customer segment.
And how do you guys make your money? I don't see anything about pricing or how you charge. Is it a fixed subscription fee per month plus a number of endpoint connections or number of documents that flow through your system or a combination of all three? How do you charge the market?
Yeah, so in the context of the B2B commerce network, connectivity is really our focus and really why customers come to us. So for that reason, connections is really the key metric that we look at. Of course, there is volume and things like that based on the size of the customer and so on and so forth. But really, it's the number of connections and depending on the bespokeness of the setup that is needed, again, on the ERP side, et cetera, that's a factor we consider. But we really do try to keep it simple. And also because a lot of the prevailing pricing model in the industry was better suited to back when bandwidth constraints, et cetera, was in a very different place and sort of time for that, right? And so I feel like a lot of those constraints today don't necessarily exist. And so our pricing model and our service model should reflect that. And we really try to stick to that.
Makes sense. And we could probably spend another 3 hours talking about AI, so I won't go down that rabbit hole. But what is, if you were to look out 6, 12, 18 months from now, is there anything you don't do yet today that your customers are saying, hey, you do this stuff and we love it, but we'd also love it if you did X, Y, and Z? Or is there anything any gaps in the market you still see that you go, we don't do this today, but give us 6 months and we will be doing that thing? What kind of is really high up on your radar in terms of priorities of product development?
Yeah, great question. It's also a bit of a tricky one for us because culturally we talked about product releases 6 or 12 months, to your point on, hey, why isn't this on our website? We just culturally tend to talk about things a lot later than when they've released, which is, again, it's reverse of what maybe conventional wisdom has been thus far. So that said, what I can share is we are mission critical. We power some very critical workflows for our customers. There is a lot of interpretation, a lot of data movement, and a lot of empowering and enabling our customer base. And when you look at every single one of those, and then some, and adjacencies and things like that, every single one of them, you can go pretty deep on leveraging AI. And then you can go very deep and broad on stitching them together with the power of AI to enable a radically new customer experience altogether. And to your previous point around customers do care for ease of use, and it's a very interesting one because there's one part of the world that says ease of use, but that's not very compelling. And then at the same time, for folks like yourselves who've seen a lot of these patterns and seen a lot of disruption in the industry over and over the years and decades, you instantly recognize that ease of use is not easy, or more people would have done it. Right?
Yeah.
And so we're obviously of the belief that ease of use and delivering on that promise is actually both hard, but worth solving for the customer, but also for the business. And so in the next 12 months, we're going to see an evolution of the Crstl platform and product along each of those dimensions, some examples that I shared, but also across all of those areas. Yeah, I can't wait to see what we come up with there.
And how far away do you think we are from me being able to upload that document I referred to from Zorro, the EDI specification document, into Crstl and having Crstl just set it up?
Yeah, I would say we're basically there. The only difference is that we have found that people would rather us do it for them. And that's the only difference, because much like there are other functions that we prefer to outsource as a business ourselves and now have to do it in-house. It's a little bit like that we do for others. So we're actually very close to, if not being there. Now, I think we all know about hallucinations and the need for deterministic versus probabilistic, particularly because when you look at the downstream impact of what happens if this were to go wrong, it can result in chargebacks, it can result in very serious sort of customer issues. And so reliability therefore becomes a very big factor for us. But as such, I think 60, 70% of it is almost here. And then the other piece of it is the business logic, right? There is the translation layer of it, which is one piece, but then there is the deep, gnarly business logic that varies not just by retailer, but by the replenish model that you're looking at for that retailer, right? The business logic piece is also where it becomes very, again, more art than science in terms of how do you weave that into your product and into the SaaS application, but also in the API and like that. So I would say we're not too far if we're not mostly there already.
Yeah, you have an exciting role to play, potentially even in the demand planning and forecasting side. And there's lots of very cool stuff I think that you can bring into the platform, but it's probably more about what you say no to than what you say yes to, right? That's always the hard bit, is determining what you say no to, right? Because you can't be all things to all people. So why try? Let's try to go deep as opposed to broad, like you said. So very exciting. An hour has absolutely flown by. I've seriously enjoyed our conversation. You're clearly very switched on. You clearly know your ish, very respectful of how hard you've worked to build what you've built. I know how hard that is, and it's very impressive. I feel like everything to do with the Shopify ecosystem, I see you guys' name everywhere, so that's why I wanted to get you on the pod. But if people want to reach out to you, I'll drop your link to your LinkedIn link in the show notes, as well as your website in the show notes. But other than that, how do you like people to reach out and get a hold of you and talk all things EDI for commerce?
Just the way you reached out, Jason, on LinkedIn DMs, I think that's probably a great way to, as I'm finding these days, to get any response, because it turns out that email inbox management is not my forte. So LinkedIn DM is totally fine.
I love it. I love it. Now, as we do come down to the end of our time together, this is where I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you. I get to let you ask me one question, any question you like. It could be personal or professional. So Dipti Desai from Crstl, what is your question for me today?
What are you looking forward to the second half of this year?
Look, it has been a wild year. I just got back from a month-long business mixed with pleasure trip to Europe with my wife. We spoke at IRX and we did lots of things while we were in Europe, but we also got to do some sightseeing while there, which I absolutely love. I love mixing business and pleasure in that way. But I came back to a very full inbox of people wanting to partner with us as a consultancy, and it's been really exciting. It's weird. We had more inquiries in the first month of 2025 than we did in the fourth quarter of 2024. So it's definitely, I feel like B2B's turned the corner. Definitely AI sales enablement technology is becoming a real big topic of conversation so we can meet customers where they are without forcing them to change behavior to adopt our digital commerce technologies. That is becoming a very exciting point of discussion that B2Bs are really starting to understand the value that it brings to them and their customers. The likes of the Motivate platform, I think, really we're putting cutting edge in that sense, but there's lots of B2B e-commerce platforms that are bringing that type of technology natively into the platform for Salesforce automation, not Salesforce the platform, but Salesforce the process automation. And that stuff is very cool. And I like that because instead of having to do a whole crap load of adoption planning up front and having to do a whole lot of customer research to make sure that you get ROI out of these commerce investments that you make, no, how about if we just don't require our customers to change their behavior to get the value out of our digital commerce investments? And that is super exciting to me. And I think that has largely been enabled through multimodal AI, and it's really only truly been possible in the last 6 to 12 months because of multimodal AI. And that to me is one of the most exciting developments. Forget agentic, that's coming. Yes, it's going to come. Yes, the Jaggers, the Coupas, the Aribas of the world are going to bring agentic buying to their platforms, which means your agentic selling platforms have to be ready to receive agentic queries. I get that. But like for immediate digital transformation, I think multimodal AI has enabled that at such a scale that there are tremendous amount of traditional legacy human to human business processes that can be automated now that does not sacrifice the customer experience in the process. And that has me super excited.
Very cool. And congratulations on all the success. I'm sure there's more to come. That's amazing.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate you sharing from your deep pool of wisdom. I wish you every success with Crstl, and I can't wait to speak to you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.